Hi there, and before we jump into this week's episode, here's a quick word from Michelle.
Building your career in the energy sector, especially as a woman, can be very challenging, even when you're good at what you do. There are politics and corporate dynamics at play which can be hard to understand. Navigating this alone can be very difficult, and if you've reached a place in your career where you'd like to take control and start shaping events instead of reacting to them, then you might just be a great fit to work with me. If this sounds like you, then you can connect with me wherever you like to hang out online, or email michelle@michellefraserconsultancy.com, and let's start our journey together. Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Euan McVicar. Euan is the climate advisor and a non-executive chair at the Crown Estate Scotland, which I'm quite excited about. Euan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for asking me to join you. Yeah, as you've already said, I've got two current roles. One, I'm a consultant and climate advisor at the law firm Pinsent Masons, where I used to be a partner in the energy team before I went off to do various other things, which is something we can come back to. And I also chaired the board at Crown Estate Scotland, and both those roles have got lots of points of interest for the energy sector.
Excellent. So how did you get started off in the energy sector, actually?
Really by luck, I have to say, is the real answer. When I was qualifying out of university and looking for a legal traineeship, I came across an opportunity at what was then Scottish Hydroelectric PLC in Perth, which is subsequently became Scottish and Southern Energy, and they were looking for a trainee to take into their legal department. At that time, they took a trainee every other year, and there was a vacancy there. And I thought, well, that looks really interesting. Read up on their annual report, saw the range of things they were doing, of exciting kind of projects, combined heat and power projects and combined cycle gas turbines. And they had a range of different technologies that they were involved in. And I thought that would be a really interesting job. But that was the first time I really thought about energy as being something that I might build a career in. And by spending 4 years at the outset of my career involved in an energy company the way that I was, I realised what an interesting and fascinating and multifaceted field it is. And I've been involved in it in one way or another ever since.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So how did you go from there to become like a climate change consultant?
Well, there's been a number of steps in that journey, but one of the things that really interested me when I was at Scottish Hydroelectric, as it was at the time, was just comparing some of the issues that arose from different types of electricity generation. And so obviously there was a lot of hydroelectric schemes. This is the mid to late 90s we're talking about. So there was lots of hydroelectric schemes. There was some pumped storage. There was increasing gas generation and increasing use of combined heat and power gas plants to be more efficient. And coal was already beginning to sort of be in decline. And there were some early stage onshore wind farms coming through and other types of smaller renewable energy project. And I used to look at some of the risks the business was exposed to around the prices of coal and oil and gas and the uncertainties that those brought into models compared to the steadier revenues that were coming from things like hydro and pumped storage. But I was also seeing the role that gas could play in cleaning up energy supply and make plants more efficient when it came to the deployment of combined heat and power plants that could make industry much more efficient, reduce their costs, and also be cleaner. And that got me really quite interested in some of the concepts around more sustainable forms of energy that were good from a security of supply perspective, but also helped reduce cost and help reduce volatility. And so that kind of got me thinking about it. And it was only much later in my career that I've come into sort of looking directly at climate change. And probably the best way to explain that is just to talk about what I did next after I left Scottish Southern Energy, as it was by then.
Okay.
So if I go on to that, so I moved into private practice with a law firm called McGregor Donald at the time, which is now part of Pinsent Masons, much bigger law firm. And there I was involved in a range of different types of infrastructure project. But when the renewables obligation order was being proposed as draft legislation, myself and a few other colleagues at the firm could see the potential for this really driving a lot more renewable energy development and doing that in a way which would allow those projects to be bank financed using project finance and create a really interesting stream of transactions in the UK. And that did take a few years to come to pass, but it did come to pass. And we'd been a very early mover in supporting renewable energy developers and financiers of renewable energy projects. And so it was that got me more heavily involved with renewable energy, particularly, rather than energy projects more generally. And I kind of helped develop a very strong practice in renewable energy over a number of years. And then in 2013, I decided to take the opportunity to join the Green Investment Bank, which was being established at the time. And the Green Investment Bank was set up by the UK government, headquartered in Edinburgh, but with a mission to help deal with a shortage of capital in the funding of green infrastructure investments. And I went in there as their general counsel. Later, I chaired the investment committee there as well. And for me, that was a really interesting period because that showed me the range of active interventions that could be made to help move towards a cleaner, greener economy and the important role, the very central role that energy played at that time. So that really moved me from being a more generalist energy lawyer to someone that was also now focused on, yes, energy projects, energy transactions, but also on dealing with climate change and policies that were associated with helping with climate change.
Okay. But that sounds amazing. And you've had a lot of amazing experience. What role have you enjoyed the most?
Well, I'm really lucky because I've enjoyed all the roles that I've been involved in. The time at Green Investment Bank was a particularly exciting time because it was a very new organisation. We were all there involved in the setup of the organisation, building it from small start and being very successful. Also, it was a short-lived exercise because it had achieved the mission it needed to achieve, and it was privatised just 5 years after it had been in existence. So we set up, we deployed over 3 billion in capital in green infrastructure projects, and then we went through a privatisation process, which was a really interesting transaction to be involved in as well. So yeah, I think probably Green Investment Bank is one of perhaps the thing that I'm most proud of having been involved in and was the most interesting because it was very different and it moved at a very fast pace. But I am lucky in that all of the different things that I've done up to that point had been great fun. I got to work with great people, be involved in great projects, learn a huge amount about the energy industry. And the things that I've gone on to do subsequently since the Green Investment Bank have also been quite different and interesting as well.
See, I think that that's an amazing achievement to start something from scratch and then see it through to for it to be privatised. How did you achieve that? I mean, it's quite a huge thing to do.
Well, we were lucky that we had a great team of people at Green Investment Bank. So we had a really strong team, people who were all there because they could see the benefit that this organisation could have for the country, for the environment, for the energy industry. And so working with people like that who are passionate, all came from very good, strong backgrounds, and we're all working together with a common purpose. That was really the main differentiating factor. There was a really strong sense of purpose, and our board and our CEO also were very clear on strategy, what we would do, what we wouldn't do. So we had a lot of clarity within the organization, and that gave us a lot of focus. And I think that's what helped make it such a successful intervention. And I think we were all quite sad to see it privatized. We would like to have seen it carrying on and continuing to do more. But in some ways, as I look back, it's actually been great that all those people that had all that passion and all that experience all moved out into different roles and have spread that around and have gone on to do some really amazing things elsewhere in the industry as well. So, perhaps it's had a continuing, knock-on impact.
Yeah, I think so too, actually. So how has all that experience prepared you for one of your current roles just now in the Crown Estate Scotland?
Well, in a lot of ways, all of these roles have been helpful in preparing me for Crown Estate Scotland, where I chair the board. I was lucky to work with a very good chair at the Green Investment Bank, Lord Smith of Kelvin, and a number of really good non-executive directors, and to act as their company secretary. And I learned a lot about governance and good governance and how a board performs effectively from that experience. And I've certainly used that to inform how I participate in our board and like to run our board and how we engage with the staff team in Crown Estate Scotland. So that's been a helpful experience. But also that sense of purpose that I talked about at Green Investment Bank has been really instrumental, because understanding how important a business with a purpose can be and how powerful that can be in motivating a team is something that is shared by Crown Estate Scotland, because there we have a mission to generate financial returns for the people of Scotland from managing the Crown Estate, but also to do that in a way which best promotes sustainable development in Scotland and has a positive impact on either the environment, on social grounds, or on economic development. And so we have got that sense of purpose about what we do and why we're doing it. And so the Green Investment Bank experience has been very relevant for that. Crown Estate Scotland is, of course, the landlord for offshore wind farms in Scotland. And in my time at McVicar's and Pinsent's, I was lucky enough to advise a whole range of clients on a lot of offshore wind projects. So I really understood that industry, and that's been useful understanding for me to take into Crown Estate Scotland as well. So yeah, those things have really kind of fed into what I do now at Crown Estate Scotland.
Is it quite hard to run a board, or?
It can be, yes, it can be. Boards often have difficult and challenging questions to grapple with. When you've got a non-executive board like we have at Crown Estate Scotland, you've always got, part of your role is to provide challenge and scrutiny and oversight to the work of the executive team, and of course, that can lead to discussion between the two groups and different perspectives. And as chair of the board, you need to make sure that that's all being done in a constructive and positive way that takes the organisation forward. Now, I'm very lucky that we've got a great team at Crown Estate Scotland, a great management team and executive team, but we've also got a really good board from a wide range of different backgrounds. So we're able to perform that role, I think, very well. But of course, you do have difficult decisions to make from time to time. Sometimes you've got to move quite quickly and do things out with the kind of the normal scheduled meetings, and there can be pressure around that, just as there can be in anything. So yes, it can be difficult at times, but overall it's not a difficult thing to have to do, and it's a very interesting and rewarding role to have.
Yeah, I think it would be. What would be the most challenging aspect of it, though?
Well, I think the most challenging aspect of it is probably the diversity of the estate. We are obviously responsible for the seabed and most of the foreshore in Scotland. We've got a lot of involvement in various ports and harbours, and lots of other things to do with the marine estate, which is obviously huge and has got massive potential, and where there's also a lot of competing interests that all want to make sure they're able to do what they want to do in that marine environment. But there's also, 4 large agricultural and sporting estates, and there's also commercial property and opportunities to become involved in a range of other property investments, which might be helpful for fulfilling that wider purpose that I talked about. So there's a really wide range of different assets, and those are all assets that are quite different from each other. And so being the landlord of an offshore wind farm is very different from being the manager of a set of offices and shops in George Street in Edinburgh. And we have to do both of those things, as well as being the largest landlord of tenant farmers in Scotland. And that brings in a whole raft of other considerations as well. So it's a really diverse portfolio, and that's probably the most difficult bit.
Okay. I think I was most impressed. You had me most impressed when you said that you were a landlord to some of the quite large wind farms. That even just managing that would be huge.
Yeah, there's a huge amount to think about in all of that. And of course, we had to design and run the tender process for offshore wind farms for ScotWind, for competing to win option agreements. And we've just recently again done that with what we called our INTOG round, which was looking at wind farms that could contribute to either innovation, the in part, or we were targeted on oil and gas projects to provide them with a decarbonised supply of electricity in the North Sea. And so we've had to run and design the tender process for both the ScotWind and the INTOG processes, as well as managing the existing wind farm leases that we have in Scottish waters.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. Managing a wind farm is quite impressive. I do think that. Do you think that wind farms are going to be quite a big impact in the energy sector going forward in years to come?
Yeah, undoubtedly, there's already a number of large offshore wind farms operating in UK waters. The UK has been seen as one of the biggest markets for that. There are a huge amount of ambition and potential in the projects that have been awarded options under the ScotWind and INTOG processes that I talked about earlier in Scottish waters. And so we're already seeing developers spending a lot of money on opening offices in Scotland, building up a supply chain, making investments which will create jobs in the Scottish economy over hopefully a long period. And where in Scotland in particular, we've got a big opportunity around floating wind turbines, because Scottish waters are a lot deeper than the waters around a lot of the coast of England and Wales. And so technology is being developed to allow floating turbines rather than fixed foundation turbines fixed into the seabed. And that kind of builds on our heritage in oil and gas with semi-submersible rigs and similar technology. And so, there's a real opportunity for Scotland to become a world leader in that technology, and for the skills that are developed around floating wind to be exported around the world where there's other similar geographical conditions, around Japan and in other parts of Asia in particular. There's thought to be a real potential for floating wind. And so I think in many ways, offshore wind is going to play an increasingly important role in the economy of Scotland and in its energy sector.
I think so too, actually. Floating wind, I've not heard of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's some really interesting projects out there, and some developers that are sort of moving quite quickly on developing technology around that. There are also some really good and impressive proposals around fixed offshore projects, but the floating is something that I think Scotland can really make a difference in.
Okay, so do you think that that Scotland can become sustainable then in the energy sector?
So I think Scotland faces the same challenges around net zero that many other places do. Now, Scotland has already performed very well in terms of decarbonisation of its electricity supplies. It's done really well in that. It's perhaps ahead of the game compared to some other parts of the world. But we do face the same challenges because we've got intermittent supply from renewables. We've got challenges with a grid system that's not been designed to have so much intermittent generation on it. And of course, we face the challenges associated with making sure there's a just transition and that we can get the right, we can get skills and resources from, in particular, the oil and gas industry focused in on and able to take advantage of some of the opportunities and perhaps help provide some of the solutions that might come to some of the problems that increasing reliance on renewable energy brings. So we've got to think about things like storage. We've got to think about things like grid upgrades and the best way of doing that, and the ongoing maintenance of these wind farms and the ability to export some of that elsewhere. One of the really interesting opportunities is around green hydrogen and whether offshore wind farms can be used to produce hydrogen, which could all be something else that they could be used for in addition to electricity. And I think that brings another interesting dimension into the energy mix. The other thing I think we've got in Scottish waters is that we've got potential for carbon capture and storage. And that's something we've been looking at Crown Estate Scotland, is looking at how some of the depleted reservoirs and other geological features in the North Sea could be used to take carbon dioxide from traditional fossil fuels and store that and keep it out the way under the sea. That could also contribute to a sustainable future for Scotland, and the way that Scotland can perhaps play a role in helping other places decarbonise as well.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. So, do you have any advice for the younger generation coming into the energy sector?
So, what would I say to someone coming into the energy sector? First of all, I'd say you're making a good choice. It's a fascinating industry. There's so many different aspects to it. And, throughout the time that I've been involved in it since 1995, it's continued to change and evolve at quite a fast pace. And so if you need to be prepared to embrace change, to look for ways to innovate in ways that you can help other people innovate. And if you are prepared to embrace those things, I think you can make a really useful contribution to something which is, so critical to our way of life. It's so critical to human advancement. It's such an essential thing, and people who don't really think about the energy industry or aren't involved in it, flick a switch and the lights go on. But there's so much involved in making that happen and making sure that hospitals and factories have the energy supplies that they need. And of course, we have to think about all of that now in the context of the climate and nature crises, and making sure that we can do that in a way that is sustainable and helps us preserve our standard of living and continue to improve it, but without having a negative impact. And the energy sector is going to be at the heart of all of that. So my advice is just get involved, do it, be prepared to accept change, be prepared to innovate, and always be looking for the best solutions in the round.
Okay, that's really wise words, actually. So what is the next thing for yourself then?
Well, at the moment, I'm quite busy, focused at Crown Estate Scotland. I've just started, I've been on the chair role for 1 year, so I've got a bit more to achieve there. And we're kind of currently planning our next corporate plan period of 5 years and trying to set our strategic objectives around that. So that's keeping me busy just now. In my work at Pinsent Masons, advising on climate change matters, there's a huge amount of regulatory change affecting our clients. There's a lot of regulation around reporting and due diligence on sustainability issues that are causing some big disruptions to the corporate world. And so I'm quite focused on helping them navigate through that and find efficient ways of providing sustainability data, building it into their supply chains, and making sure they've got the governance in place within their organizations to deal with all of that data and build it effectively into decision making. So yeah, there's no shortage of things to be focusing on just now.
No, and that sounds amazing as well. So I'm going to ask you maybe one final question. I ask everybody this. If you could turn back time, would you change anything?
No, I wouldn't. I'm not one for regrets. I think that all of the different roles I've done in my career have all been some evolution on a previous role, and I've kind of been able to take things from each of them. And so even when you're in more challenging situations, things don't necessarily go the way that you want, there's always something positive you can take out of that as a learning experience. So no, I'm not one for changing things. So you deal with the sea conditions you've got, you don't try and change them.
That's really wise words, actually. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Euan for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.